Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dojo Live. Today is Wednesday, February 23rd, 2022. This is Tulio Siragusa broadcasting from Southern California, and I'm joined by Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico. Hi, Kim. Welcome to the show again.
Hey, Tulio. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Today, our guest is Karan Talati, who is the CEO at First Resonance, and we're excited to speak with him. We're going to talk about agile manufacturing. But before we go into that conversation, let's get to know Karan a little bit, get to know our guest, get to know the company. If you could please just tell us a little bit about yourself, Karan, and then we'll talk about the company as well. Welcome to the show again.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely, Tulio. And thank you so much for having me on today. I'm Karan Talati. I'm the founder and CEO of First Resonance. I live down here in Los Angeles. And by background, I'm a mechanical engineer turned software engineer. Been spending the past many years bringing data and ML to hardware. At First Resonance, we're having a blast doing some of that. To give you a little bit of history on some of the adventures that I've been through as well, after graduating college now nearly a decade ago, I ended up out here in Los Angeles to work at SpaceX, where I had the opportunity really to build some of the initial automation systems, as well as be a part of that journey in a really critical development period, right? Ended up getting my hands dirty with the reusability effort when we first started landing rockets and making use of the data in the factory to make an assessment on whether that rocket was reusable or not and how to actually do that, right? So, since then, been doing a mix of things across data and engineering, and about 3 years ago, founded First Resonance, which I can tell you more about here in a bit.
Great. Thanks.
So you got your hands dirty literally or figuratively or both?
Both, absolutely both. Yeah. There's definitely some interesting startup grind.
Rocket science work. We're talking with a rocket scientist here.
I like rocket engineer. The scientists were the really smart ones.
Yeah, well, that's what a scientist would say. Okay, Karan, tell us about First Resonance. What does the company do? What was like the aha moment where they decided, let's build this thing?
Sure, absolutely. So First Resonance, we founded the company about 3 years ago when we started putting some dots together on our history and what we've built, as well as what we were seeing out there in the industry, especially as it relates to software. So the DevOps movement in the past 10, 20 years and the patterns of development there were definitely influential to us as we were employing software to solving some of these really hard manufacturing challenges, right? However, when we talk to our peers in like industries or like companies in automotive and manufacturing, we found that a lot of the systems and ways of doing work are still very, very dated, very clunky, very tops down, right? A system that kind of tells you what to do as opposed to a system that helps you get your job done. So about 3 years ago, myself and my co-founder and our COO, Neil Saraf, founded the company to build tools to empower manufacturing engineers to plug into these large and complex systems, right? Use modern kind of DevOps patterns to bring hardware together. And that's exactly what we're doing today. Over the past many years, we've kind of course corrected and iterated our way to product market fit. We now have over 30 companies using Ion to power their automotive, aerospace, robotics operations. And the workflows that it provides for is really a unified way to define how a factory process should work. And then when things change, not if things change, but when things change, equip engineers with the ability to affect that change and to communicate all of that change such that the end result is traceable and actually of quality, right? So that's really a lot of what we think about philosophically at First Resonance, is that we do live in a world that's moving a lot faster. It's a lot more dynamic. So we need more flexibility. But in a high criticality type of industry like manufacturing, especially when lives are in play, you have cars that are driving around people or airplanes flying people, you can't necessarily employ the same move fast and break things concept. So we think about a lot, and what we've now built into the Ion platform is that you can have flexibility, but you can have it only with really great traceability and understandability of how that change is happening in the factory. And that's what our customers that are building these complex products now are using Ion to do.
All right, I'm excited to learn a lot more. In a past role, I built an industrial design business, and the process to getting even the design process was very long, and then of course the BOM cost that often made it impossible. So there's a lot that went into actually creating an IoT device, for example, a sensor or things of that sort. So I'm curious to learn about what you guys are doing to speed up that challenge. Kim, could you please kick off the topic today, and let's see what we can learn.
Of course. Thank you, Tulio, and thank you for being with us today, Karan. The topic of today, as chosen by you, is Agile hardware manufacturing, meeting the century's toughest challenges. And you'll be answering the question of why hardware manufacturers need to adapt to change, and really what needs to change in order for that to happen. So, Karan, why did you choose today's topic? I mean, that's a pretty big claim of the century's toughest challenges. What are those?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, and one that we ask ourselves every single day and try to answer for our customers, right? So there's two layers in that. I think people do talk a lot about some of these traditional industries like manufacturing, like healthcare, like finance, and their need to change. That is true in manufacturing. I think a lot of these legacy players are just opening up their eyes or really need to make that change. When we talk about change, we're also talking about hardware and product change. And that's really the topic that we're talking about. So there's maybe two levels of changes here, change in how people work, as well as change on the work. So that's the topic that I'd love to talk more about, and also reflect on some of the stories from my experience. At SpaceX, when we were in that inflection period of scaling up the production of the Falcon 9 rocket, this was, maybe, about like 7-8 years ago. Once we had, launched the first few missions were successful, the actual rocket design was proving itself out. We wanted to scale up in terms of volume, the production of that rocket. Moreover, we were constantly improving. I think that's something that you can see in companies like SpaceX and Tesla. There's constant iterations, right? So Tesla might be one that's a little bit more tangible. There really isn't a lot of fanfare between a 2018 Model 3, a 2019, and a 2020. If anybody has friends that drive Teslas, but there is this really amazing fascination and capability with these constant software updates and this constant improving of small design features, right? That's actually what we had on the Falcon 9 rocket as well. So we really had to embrace that. We had to embrace that we were going to make design changes and engineering changes to the rocket constantly. And moreover, even while the rocket was being produced, right? That was not just a benefit, it was critical for our ability to actually deliver the best vehicle in the fastest way and in the safest way, right? And when things go wrong, when we test fast and test often and we find failure, to be able to quickly, adapt to that was the real kind of benefit, right? Or the advantage that SpaceX had to be able to move in the industry as quickly as it did. We believe now that with some of these challenges in industry such as climate change, transportation, urban mobility, as well as just faster pace competition, all companies have to embrace a faster rate of change. That's incredibly hard to do in hardware because of the systems that as they're laid out. You design stuff. Once that design is locked in, these words are used. You move from design into manufacturing, into operations, right? Companies really can't afford that kind of waiting game now and locking in, right? If they do, they'll either fall behind from competition or they really just won't solve the problem. We believe now that in order to solve things like urban air mobility, transportation, energy, these quick iterations are needed. So hardware manufacturers need to embrace systems that allow them to actually, manage that flexibility, right?
So go ahead, Kim.
Well, I think we're going to get into the technology. I think that's going to be the main focus of the whole conversation today. But before we do that, I do have this question of, you talk about embracing change and what needs to change. How much of this is the actual tech, and how much of this is just mindset, company culture, and kind of going against maybe our own natural tendencies as a human being to not really like change so much? So what have you discovered for the human side, but also how does then tech get incorporated into that?
I want to throw in another monkey wrench into that question. Some of these are regulation issues as well, right? Regulation hasn't kept up with technology advancements. They're still predicating things on how things used to be even 20, 30 years ago. So how is that now evolving, and who's lobbying for changes to reflect the realities of today? So
we lost you too, Leo. I think I can't.
Oh,
no, you're back.
Sorry. I just wanted to add that it's to make the question even more complex. That came
Yeah.
So got regulation, human nature, and tech. Go.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So we got three big monkey wrenches. So absolutely. Let's unpack each one of these things, right? So from a technical side, and especially when it comes to change, as an engineer, it's fascinating to run into problems that aren't solvable purely by technology and technical engineering. And some of this requires social engineering and relationship building. And I almost if I had said that to myself 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have believed myself or ran away completely. But it does take a team. So starting with Kim's side of how much of this is the people and the mindsets. Fortunately enough, at First Resonance, we have a team heavily indexed on the engineering and the technology side. We also have our go-to-market team and our customer success team that is really working hand in hand with our customers to make sure that they are able to understand the technology that we're bringing them, as well as the change that's going to be required in their organization to embrace that change, right? And that really comes down to relationship building, explaining things, great documentation, and also empowerment, right? To be able to embrace the technology and apply it themselves rather than just, kind of trying to shove it down their organization, which is, oftentimes not going to work well, right? So customer success is a big part of what we do here at First Resonance. And our customer success team actually works pretty closely with our engineering team. We'll come back to the technology with more depth here in a moment, but to understand the APIs and how we can help our customers actually automate their own factory processes rather than build every single solution for them, right? On the technology side, when we talk about change, we are really looking to solve, or what Ion does for companies is allow them to embrace change in their design to manufacturing process flow, right? And that's pretty new. Traditional systems like ERP systems or MES systems really expect kind of a linear flow down of that information. Tulio was talking earlier about that process of coming up with the the initial design and even managing that change, right? And there is that design phase. But then what happens once you've gotten in something that you want to build? Many companies actually have that mindset of, well, once the BOM is locked in, that's what we're going to produce. So don't change anything anymore because we can't change these presses. We can't change these mills. We've set up our whole factory to produce this object. Obviously, technology has actually caught up. We now have things like additive manufacturing that is highly configurable, right? So you can actually inject change in regularly. That's the kind of change from the design and manufacturing side that Ion allows companies to introduce into their factory processes and actually build products. Now, Tulio hit on the third big monkey wrench there of the regulation and certification side. So we do have multiple customers that are under regulation by bodies such as the National Highway Transportation Safety Board, the FAA, the Space Force, and what we found is that, one, we're very much in the midst of this conversation right now. Regulators are asking the same types of questions. The actual manufacturers are having conversations with the regulators on what exactly is allowable and what is safe. What we've observed, and actually pulling on our experience, I'll speak to our experience and also what we're actively seeing with some of our customers. While I was at SpaceX, we were very rapidly undergoing the process for certifying for government launches. And culturally, there was a pretty big clash there around what we were doing operationally in terms of constantly iterating on the rocket and what the government expected, right?
Really?
Yeah, it was messy.
Over here.
Yeah, it was,
No.
the story looking back obviously is a pretty exciting one, but definitely a messy path. But
yeah.
some of these stories are out there of, I'll give you an example. When SpaceX was testing one of the vehicles for launches, and there was an incident. And this, again, keep in mind, this was a test. So it's almost like, we have this mentality at SpaceX to test to the limits. When there was that incident, the level of traceability that we had allowed NASA to actually come back and get SpaceX back onto the launch pad much faster for the next test. And what that's actually amounted to is SpaceX has been able to really quickly get to full human, missions, right? Crewed missions for the ISS launches in a timeline that nobody expected. And they actually beat competitors, established competitors, and we don't have to name names, but established competitors that still haven't been able to do that same thing, right? And so the world is moving faster. That level of traceability, while embracing flexibility and understanding, regulators are kind of now understanding more than ever now that, hey, one should embrace change so long as we can understand that change. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of narrowing in there, Tulio, to your point, and something that we are working very much on at First Resonance is let's give the regulators the data that they need and help them push their certification and regulatory processes into a data-driven one, such that the world can move fast to solve some of these big challenges, but do so in a safe way.
Yeah, I can't help but notice you keep saying, I believe it's the name of your product, right? Ion. At First Resonance, it's okay.
That's right.
It's been a long time since I've taken a chemistry class, probably 20 plus years now. But if I recall, an ion is a charged molecule, right? Positive or negative. Basically, it's ripe to change. It's looking for this opportunity. It can maybe go the way you want it to go, or it could go incredibly wrong. Yeah. Right? So I'm guessing that you very, very intentionally chose the name Ion. Yeah. What else, aside from traceability, is your product accomplishing to help make sure that the change is what you want and not some explosive disaster?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. And we can kind of extend on that metaphor quite a bit. This, there's granularity as part of this and modularity, especially when it comes to modern software systems. An ion is actually much more resolute than something like a full molecule and whatnot. So that metaphor can actually go on. And we have many discussions here at First Resonance when we named the product and also continue to, is like, wow, that actually ends up, serving our purpose even further, right? Ions being in service to bits and bytes as we go from the digital to physical. So that's really great that you picked up on that as well, Kim. What else is Ion solve?
Kim is the scientist on the show.
Yeah, clearly.
I try to be.
I love it.
Fake it till you make
it. Yeah, exactly. So what else does Ion solve? That was a question that you asked there, Kim. And in a faster moving world, one of the major things that we had built in to the development of Ion from the very get-go was building a product that we would want to use as manufacturers and manufacturing engineers. And we were very opinionated on that when we started building the product, and we continue to be. So what does that mean, and what does that serve? Ion now serves many of our customers in the capacity of allowing them to collaborate. So individual engineers, people like manufacturing engineers, quality engineers, industrial engineers, even people like receiving inspection clerks that are at the receiving dock of a manufacturing plant, people who are doing material issuing or supply chain analysis. What Ion enables is really like point-to-point collaboration. We wouldn't go so far as to think of this as a social network, but we definitely could, in terms of the overall vision of what Ion can serve in a factory, is kind of a social network for people having many, many nuanced and complicated relationships as sophisticated hardware products get built. And we do believe that enabling this type of collaboration and some of these modern types of UX interfaces like notifications and kind of like dashboards for where everything is and who is involved will allow companies to actually make much better decisions rather than a software system that kind of tells you what you need to do next or what's right and what's wrong, right? So that's a major aspect of what we think about with Ion. It not only allows you to have traceability around the hardware and the products that the company is building, but also the collaboration features that people like manufacturing engineers, quality engineers, supply chain analysts need to have in an increasingly kind of sophisticated and fast-paced hardware development environment.
Yeah, which I guess increases the trust, which then increases the willingness to do these types of changes. Go ahead, Tulio.
So I'm curious. I think you hinted the possibility that it doesn't have a workflow, because a lot of people like the workflow. It helps them organize their initiatives. So without that, how does it actually create that collaboration? Is it customizable based on the manufacturer? Can you walk us through a little bit of the dynamics of how that comes together?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll qualify there, Tulio, is that there is workflow, right? But the way we think about workflow, absolutely. The way that we actually think about workflow at First Resonance when building Ion is we look at it from the workflow of the ICP, right? Or the ideal customer profile, or even the individuals that are using it. Now, that has increased from just manufacturing engineers into some of these other roles that I mentioned. So what are the individual workflows and how do these people get their job done? Is the workflows that we think about rather than traditional systems, which very much think about the workflow from the perspective of what are the end business goals, right? And that has really been the evolution. And I think underlying some of these things, especially for the audience here, what is the DevOps movement? Is it still, I have many questions around that. And I think there's a lot of conversation, which is, I'll point out a few observations, right? Is that it's still very much happening. The work that has been done has been really empowering individual engineers and the people in that entire stack, from what used to be software developers to software developer engineers in test to site reliability engineers to release engineers to quality assurance folks, kind of collapse into a workflow for each one of those that still sits within the larger system output, right? So in a factory, that evolution really hasn't quite happened yet, right? It's actively happening. So we think a lot about what is the workflow for manufacturing people or industrial engineers, the same way that we think about DevOps engineers and software engineers that are developing the code, and then having a system that allows them to play well with one another, systems like GitHub, for example, right?
Yeah.
So just real quick, I'm sorry. So in essence, whether I'm a ChemDem shop or an Agile shop, it's customizable or adapted to my environment, so that I don't have to change the way I do things, but I have a way to seamlessly collaborate with all the parties involved. I'm obviously referring to more of the software side of things. What has been the use? What have been sort of the feedback around that in terms of use cases? What was some of the lessons learned as you started introducing this? Because that is a disruption. You're introducing a change in some places, a significant change. As Kim mentioned, you probably get some resistance. People don't like change. What's that been like, and what ultimately makes people realize, oh, okay, it is worth going through that disruption?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we started First Resonance, one of the other things that we were very actively minded on was that we were going to build for a certain type of company, and that certain type of company are companies that are really building in the 21st century for the 21st century. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is, look, the reality of manufacturing and hardware and industrial is that there are companies that have been along for a really, really long time, and they're not necessarily going to embrace what we're bringing to market out the gate. What they are maybe going to do, however, is look at what are all the, for the lack of better words, what are the cool kids doing, right? And we can see what the effects of that are. In reality, it took maybe years, right, for the big auto companies to realize that this one company on the West Coast was going to give them a run for their money when the entire world was going to shift to EVs. And that's exactly the pattern that we're going into. So we have companies. Did I? Okay.
You're back. You left off at the we as companies.
We have companies.
Yeah, we have company. We have companies using the Ion platform that are building new products like electric airplanes, small rocket launch, additively manufactured products, robots that are operating in like the healthcare space, and the list kind of goes on, right? And these aren't the big the big titans of the last century. So when we talk to customers like those, what we find is actually what the flexibility that Ion brings, the ability to customize those workflows like you were talking about, Tulio, is that Ion actually reflects the reality of what these companies are struggling with today. Companies that are very much in an agile workflow or a Kanban workflow with the intention to go to a more scaled one. Ion actually scales up with these companies, right? Rather than keeping these companies on spreadsheets for years and years and years and hoping that they can actually scale up to the big systems that are basically built to support the big companies that are there today. And honestly, you can argue that those systems are way overbuilt for any company that is in a rapid iteration mode, right? And just figuring out its R&D to scale up motion. So that's been the general feedback. And as the big companies have seen what we're doing and who we're doing it with, and I can't disclose the names necessarily, but just this year, as we come into this year, we have now landed customers, individual teams or departments at some of the largest companies and some of the oldest companies in the aerospace and automotive world. So, sometimes
congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. I mean, you mentioned the titans of this last century, and what I'm hearing is if you either want to remain the titan of this next coming century or be the titan of the next coming century, you're going to have to embrace Agile and learn how to be flexible, and your technology is there to help with that.
That's right.
Yeah. See, I think the future doesn't belong to any titans. It's going to be decentralized and very different, but that's a whole topic for another day.
So let's talk about beliefs then here at First Resonance, specifically your company culture. Now, obviously, your company culture is one that embraces change. What else is it about you as a company that you are trying to fortify, that you're growing toward, and what you sort of look for in the individuals who want to work with you? And if I want to come work for First Resonance, why do I want to do that? And what are you looking for in me?
Absolutely. So a few of the things that we look for, and I'll also talk about some of the overarching culture. The attributes that we look for resonators, which is what we call ourselves, is people who can embrace the unknown. And I mean that like very literally in that like there are a lot of questions around who is going to win some of the problems in the century, what are the products that are going to support it, and also what does a product look like, right? There's a lot of ambiguity there. Elon has kind of said this one quote, or I think he stole it from somebody, right? Starting a company is like chewing on glass while staring into the abyss. There's a certain level of ambiguity that's required for people to embrace to come into an operation like ours. Now, I don't mean to say that we are chewing on glass and staring into the abyss. We have this amazing opportunity to actually be, driving meaningful outcomes. But, people who embrace ambiguity is definitely an important part. So what does that lead to, and why is ambiguity important, and how does that come together? At First Resonance, we have designers, product engineers, front-end engineers, back-end engineers constantly and in a parallel fashion coming to solutions for solving a problem, right? And that's a very interesting and tough kind of environment to work in because it is ambiguous. There are changes that happen even to the software design or the spec that the business and product brings in to when it goes into wireframes to when it goes into implementation. And that's something that we're very, very proud of here at First Resonance. I'll give you an example of how that's worked well for us. We have, in the past defined certain specifications on how the product should work. And then that has gone into development where a back-end engineer or platform engineer has come back and said, hey, actually, these two data models and these two types that we've defined can actually be one, and they should be one because we get this benefit of being able to reuse that same data model for sending out notifications or associating one user to another, right? This is an example that just happened this week. We have users in Ion, and then we created this concept of contacts. And then we also have machines. And a backend engineer said, hey, wait, aren't these all just users of the platform? So now with Ion, a robot actually can be viewed the same way as a human user. We do indicate that they're different for what it's worth, but they can actually work together. And when we talk about the future of manufacturing, going from manual processes of humans doing kind of like, thinking critical type of work to robots doing some of that automated work, and to see that in a unified way, as who's looking at the factory, that's a concept that you get with Ion, right? It's not a concept that you get with some of these old systems where people are some sort of HR kind of entity and robots are some sort of innovation thing, right? With Ion, you have a unified view at how that work moves.
That sounds like a product in its making, actually, on its own. A new evolution of UX. What is the user experience? What does that look like in the future? Redefining the user. That could be an interesting platform all to itself. So it's been great to have you. We're over time. We could talk for hours. This is such an interesting topic, and we congratulate you on all that you're doing. It sounds as though you've created something that's not only disruptive, but very adaptable. And that's kind of a really great combination for a business to have. So congratulations. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a second. Can we have 2 more shows tomorrow, right? We got a 10 a.m. show and a 12 p.m. show.
We do. Our 10 a.m. show is going to be with Tom Livney, who is the CEO and founder of Verbit. So we're going to be looking at how AI can help streamline the way we consume media and make the vast amount of content out there a lot more accessible, digestible, and easy to understand. Then at noon, we'll be talking with Jonathan Bush, CEO at Zeus Health, how to build a data and technology infrastructure platform that enables healthcare organizations to collaborate seamlessly. That was a mouthful. So yeah, join us tomorrow on Dojo Live, 10 o'clock a.m., 12 o'clock p.m. at Pacific time. So thank you so much for being here today, Karan and Tulu. See you tomorrow.
Thank you so much for having us.